And we're live. We're live, guys. Welcome to another episode of Good Morning Liberty. It is Wednesday morning, September the 19th, 2018. My name is Michael Boldin. I really appreciate you being here with me. We're broadcasting live from the 10th Amendment Center, my home studio here in downtown Los Angeles. So it is morning here on the West Coast. Good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in. Hi to Steve Smith out in the chat and everybody else who's watching live. Or, of course, if you're watching later on the archives, I appreciate you just as much. It is fun. I noticed as I've become more engaged in YouTube, hi to EHP Training. Really good to see you as well. I noticed as I spend more and more time with my nephews who are now, this weekend, the 21st and the 24th, two nephews. One turns 18. I think he's getting his first job, which is cool. The other has a job, is in his second year in college. His birthday's on the 24th. He's turning 20. So over the last few years, as I've hung out with them more and more and more, they come out and visit from Milwaukee pretty regularly with their dad, my brother, and they're always on YouTube. I mean, the younger people, they don't use television, of course. They don't read newspapers, of course. But they scoff like the kind of TV that even us kind of older folk use, like Netflix or Amazon. They don't touch any of that stuff. They don't know anything about any of it. They may have heard a few things through friends or whatever, but they really just spend their days on YouTube. So as I've hung out with them, I'm like, man, this is pretty cool. So I've found a bunch of YouTubers that I think are interesting on various issues. Of course, I watched the Ron Paul Liberty Report right before this show. Ron Paul's on Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, and it kind of gave me the idea to do it at this time, the goal being kind of a block of liberty-based discussions and conversations television here on YouTube. I'm hoping that someone's going to I usually end about 10 a.m. I'm hoping someone will take the ball and run with it and do a 10 a.m. show, or 10 a.m. Pacific time, of course, and go with it from there. But then I also notice that I watch some natural health shows. Robert Scott Bell is a very good friend of mine. He does a daily radio show, and he started doing YouTube last year sometime. And I noticed that in the breaks of his live TV show, he's talking with people in the audience. It's a lot more entertaining when you're actually engaging with people, at least when you're watching. So hopefully it is for you guys. I know it is for me. I actually enjoy seeing the chat come in. Taco Salad, awesome. Scouse Jack, Brian Hickman. I got a first time ever for a message held for review in live chat. Steve Smith. I'm going to show that one. I'm torn. I don't know why. They must have some kind of filter on the word BitChute. I'm torn between wanting to support BitChute and expressing my displeasure to YouTube for their censorship and supporting you here. I'll take it either way, whatever works. If you happen to want to jump in live, that's cool. We definitely post all of our videos over to BitChute and Reel.video, which is run by a good guy, Mike Adams. So I'm just rambling. I just want to thank you, of course, for being here. I've really been enjoying this. Is our second month. We started at the end of July, our second month of doing this. I'm really enjoying it. I'm learning a lot. And what I notice is that for the first time in a long time, I'm actually spending a little bit more time looking at the political drama of the day, which is not only interesting, it's educational, sometimes it's entertaining. But then I'm also I follow on Twitter a number of accounts, and I have friends on Facebook that are historians. So J.L. Bell, who I follow on Twitter, is a leading, like a Massachusetts Historical Society, the Freedom Trail, the early revolutionary heroes. This guy's like an expert. Dave Benner, who writes for the 10th Amendment Center, is an excellent historian. He's written a great book, Compact of the Republic, and he blogs pretty regularly on things that have happened today in history. So I'm paying attention to stuff like that, and that leads me to what I want to talk about today's show. Taco Salad. Now that you can stream sports over the internet, there's no point in having cable. Yeah, I saw that Amazon Prime was even, I don't know if Amazon was looking to get Monday Night Football or something like that. It just makes no sense to have this prepackaged where they force you, like, I don't watch sports, and for people who don't watch like drama, what if they just want the sports package? It makes sense to this is the market in action, which is really cool. So the short version, I love doing the live shows. I've always done more produced episodes, and I've actually got one. I normally don't publish them during the week, but I have one that's going to go, it's scheduled to go live at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So just about right when I'm done. It's a video on, it's a short kind of educational one of these more produced ones where I'm cutting in B-roll and things like that and titles. Basically a short version of what we're talking about today. That is George Washington's warning on his farewell address. Hi to Justin. Good morning, Liberty. Awesome. Brian Hickman. Haven't watched cable in a few years either. I've got the antenna TV and read more articles lately. Yeah, I've been reading more too, which is cool. And the less time I spend on social media like Facebook, which I still go on there, I see it not only as a tool to help spread the word, but I do keep up in touch with people that I haven't been able to in ages. So on that, it's cool, but I'm not reading as much through them. I'm getting ideas, and then I'm going elsewhere and doing more research. And maybe that's a combination of that and this show. So back to the point. So today in history, on September 19th, 1796, George Washington gave his famous farewell address. This was him retiring from politics. A lot of people wanted him to stay in office. In fact, some people wanted him to basically be king right off the bat. And Washington, like all politicians, like all human beings, had his flaws. I know a lot of people will bring up the Whiskey Rebellion. Yeah, I mean, the guy liked central power, especially in comparison to what some of the other founders, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, who weren't friends either, and others, Elbridge Gerry. He was kind of one of the bigger government guys of the time, but in comparison to now, there is no one in government today who was as small government as George Washington was. Even Hamilton. I mean, maybe Hamilton would have gone nuts in today's climate. Probably. He was a monarchist. He was probably one of those guys that wanted the king for life in George Washington. But Washington served 2 terms, and he wanted out. And in fact, he actually wanted to quit after the first term. He wanted to set a precedent that this was supposed to be just a public office. You go in, you basically, I mean, they got paid, but he was already a rich man. You go in, you donate your time and your expertise, and you'd be gone. It took a lot of convincing even to get him to go to the convention in the first place. A lot of people didn't think he was going to make it, but they really pressed upon him that this was the famous hero. So whether you liked his politics or not, he was a hero to most Americans. They looked up to him as being a leader. So his farewell address, he actually planned on quitting. I didn't know this. So as I'm researching this, he actually planned on quitting after his first term. First of all, he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to go to the Constitutional Convention. Took convincing. He was convinced to be president first round. He was going to quit after the first term. Got convinced to stay another round. And then after the second one, he said, I'm done. And he said, and this was even before the amendment that said that there would only be 2 terms in office. He basically set the stage. FDR, on the other hand, probably would have stayed forever had he lived. So there was Washington's farewell speech is probably, at least in my mind, other than maybe crossing the Delaware, his most well-known effort. This was his warning, his letter to his friends and fellow citizens, his thoughts on government. He saw the kind of situation is pretty fragile. He was saying, be careful before you start changing things. Give it a little bit of time. But he included there a lot of advice and even some warnings on a number of issues. And I want to go through his speech a little bit today, talk about it, give you some of the best quotes. But then I also want to cover, there's been a lot of, we'll say, ink spilled on this, and that's kind of an old school phrase. But the warning that he included that I think may be the most important is actually almost never covered. And Mike Meharry wrote a great article, and that's also what the video that I did. It's 2 minutes and I think 2 seconds. So right after this show is done, just refresh our channel. You should see a brand new video up and ready to go. So back over to the chat. EHP favorite. Oh yeah, I'm going to get to this one. Oh no, I don't think I highlighted this. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. Yes, a fire not to be quenched demands a uniform vigilance to prevent its bursting into a flame, lest instead of warming, it should consume. Yeah, that's awesome. His warning against the power of faction, one political party versus the other. We'll definitely get into. Hickman, Patrick Henry was pretty cool. Yeah, his speeches and he was basically feared at the Virginia Ratifying Convention. A lot of the leading founders that we would know and respect today, Madison, Jefferson, others, Washington, they didn't like him. And maybe they thought he was a little nuts on his view, but they also recognized that when Patrick Henry spoke, people listened. So he was a serious threat to whatever they may had want to accomplish. So let's get into George Washington's farewell address. I've got it here from the Avalon Project. And I'll, of course, as always, link at the bottom. Oh, and I forgot. I got to say it. With all the thanks for you joining, I do want to thank everyone who's smashing the like button. It is incredibly important to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and I see all of you guys leaving comments. I really appreciate that. And if you want to get notifications rather than just popping in, hit the little bell button on YouTube. You will definitely get notified. If you're watching in the archives, wherever you happen to see it, if there's a like button available, hit it. A comment button, leave a comment, share your thoughts. All these actions, they trigger the social media site that you're on. They trigger the algorithm. They're all using algorithms, and they trigger it to show the information to more people. So thank you so much for the comments, for the likes, for the subscriptions. It all really helps. I'm definitely working hard, and I want to really build this up. I know it's going to take time, but I recognize that the key is consistency. And in a couple of years, I think Justin may have said it the other day, eventually you're not going to be able to keep up with people in the chat. And I know that's going to happen. I've watched this happen on other channels. So we're going to really work hard on this. Like button smash. Thank you, Taco Salad. It's the only way to do it. Okay, so Washington's farewell address, September 19th, 1796. I'm skipping this whole first section because this is the section that most everyone skips. His first, well, it's basically some warm feelings and things like that. But the first real warning and his advice, I'm going to skip that part and jump down to here. And this gets right to the political parties. He says, the alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge. Man, this couldn't be more topical. Natural to party dissension, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities. It is itself a frightful despotism. It almost gives me chills to read that. And I'm not... It's prophetic. Well, it isn't necessarily, he wasn't being a prophet. I think he was being a student of history. Now, the interesting fact here is the person who may have been considered one of the greatest students of history at the time, James Madison, he actually wrote the first draft of Washington's farewell address. And there was some behind-the-scenes drama on this. People will ask, well, why would he go to Madison? But he did. James Madison was a student of history and known as the father of the Constitution today. Obviously, this was a great guy to have you do your speech writing. I mean, if you got a Madison available, this is who you're going to go to. But he wrote it in 1792. Washington was absolutely prepared to resign after that first term. He reached out to James Madison, said, I want you to write this. And I should really, maybe next year, I'll kind of compare the differences between the original version that Madison wrote. He kept the draft for 4 years after he decided to stay in office, kept the draft, and then did some modifications. I'm not sure the difference between the two, but you can see the Madisonian understanding of history. I mean, Washington was very well read, but Madison was an expert in history. And this isn't necessarily as prophetic as it is understanding human nature and understanding the nature of faction. They didn't refer to political parties as much as they did faction. These are large groups that would work together under one banner. It's how we describe political parties today. So the alternate domination of one over the other, sharpened by the spirit of revenge. What's been happening in modern times? It is so much in our face today. where the major political parties, Republicans and Democrats, they don't care about principles. They can support or oppose the exact same thing depending on who's in office. You have all the people who marched against George Bush's wars who just didn't do anything about Obama's same ones that got worse. Now they're getting back in the street and doing the same a little bit with Trump. But you see the Tea Party types. Just yesterday, I saw that Ted Cruz, this is a guy who was known as one of the leading constitutional conservatives among many people. He railed, he forced I don't know how it played out. A shutdown over Obamacare. He wanted to shut down the government overfunding of Obamacare. He railed against big government spending when Obama was in office. But yesterday, he voted to approve like another $900 billion in government spending. Massive spending, massive federal funding, and funding of Obamacare. When Obama was in office, he was willing to do a shutdown because it's all stunts. These people are for or against things based on a spirit of revenge and control and power, not on principles. And that leads to what Washington warned, a frightful despotism. And he says this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. Because if no one has principles and they're willing just to control power and go back and forth depending on what team is in charge, it's just the power is always going to grow. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual. Everyone is always, even in the Ron Paul movement, and I definitely was engaged in the grassroots when Ron Paul was running for president. A lot of people, and I gave a speech on this in New Hampshire, I think in 2010. Basically, so many people are looking for a single person to ride in on a white horse and save us. And my warning at the Liberty Forum in New Hampshire was don't do that. Like, let's say you love Ron Paul. Let's say you love Donald Trump or Barack Obama or whoever it may be that you choose to love as a potential president. You may be on their team. You may like them as a person. I mean, I don't know. Most of us haven't met these people, but you may like the persona that you see on TV. But don't look at them as a hero, as a savior, because as long as you go to go to a person to solve all the problems, individual, eventually someone's going to come in, a strong man or a strong woman is going to come in and use that to create what Washington warned of, the absolute power of an individual. And he says, sooner or later, the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. That is a very, very powerful warning. EHP training, one snake, two heads. Oh, yeah. He goes on, without looking forward to an extremity of this kind, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain it. So reject the ideas of faction. I need some water, sorry. It's better than pounding that much coffee, although it's probably going to be close today. I've been working hard. So yeah, the dangers of Team A versus Team B over principle is really a big deal. And now, mind you, he didn't warn about party in isolation. He talked about something previously that I'm going to get to shortly. Let me skip that one. It's basically going on. If you're encroaching powers, you're allowing too much centralization of power, you're going to get despotism. His next big warning or piece of advice is on religion and morality. And a lot of the founders talked about, hey, you can only have good government with a moral people. I think John Adams said that. And here's how Washington put it. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. He believed that there needed to be a good moral foundation. Goes on and says, let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? In other words, if you're an immoral person, And I think most politicians in modern times are pretty immoral, no matter how you may define it, whatever religion you subscribe to, you participate with or not. I think it's pretty clear that most politicians are just slimeballs. They will say what they want to say, what they need to say to get what they want. And maybe most people don't see that because they keep voting for them. I think, but then again, it's less than half the population. I think most of us recognize these people are generally just garbage. It's rare when you have a good, honest person. And I think Ron Paul was one of those people, Thomas Massey as well. And you could call Ron Paul the crazy uncle, but even his opponents would recognize, hey, he's not your normal politician just out there trying to scrape for dollars and changing his tune over time. He was consistent. Dr. No kept the same position. That's the type of person that George Washington said should be in office. If you're going to have this government, you got to have moral people that you can trust. Not people who just want power or willing to do anything to have that kind of power. I'm preaching, maybe to the choir. I'm not a preacher for sure. Of anybody who, I'm just sharing with you Washington's views. I am a very flawed individual, so I could never write something this great. So the next thing that he warns about, and this also just happened yesterday in the United States Imperial Senate, a very important source of strength and security. Cherish the public credit. One method of preserving it is to use it as sparingly as possible. Now we have today a government with $21 trillion plus in debt. And just yesterday, Ted Cruz, I shouldn't just single out Cruz. I do because he was held up as this bastion of constitutionalism, and I've always thought the guy was a fraud. Yesterday's vote shows that he was just as bad as everyone else by a vote of 97-3. It was going to pass anyways. He should have voted no on principle and then campaigned on that. He's worried about being challenged from the left. Well, the problem isn't that he isn't left enough. The problem is that he hasn't done his job in the Senate to educate the voters of his state. Now, maybe that's beyond his skill, but so be it. Have principle whether you win or lose. And I've often held that view when I started here at the 10th Amendment Center. Look, my goal was just to reach one or two people with a blog. And I've had people tell me, change your tune on this issue or that issue. But there's no way. I mean, I'm not doing this to get rich. I always ask for money at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members, but it's just so to enable me to continue doing what I'm doing. And the market is responding, saying, keep doing what you're doing. Hopefully we'll reach a larger market over time. But he says, cherish the public credit and use it as sparingly as possible, not $21 trillion in debt. I just recorded a video that I'll probably publish in sometime next few weeks. One of these short 2 to 3 minute videos where Thomas Jefferson talked about spending, deficit spending, debt spending that will be paid by future generations in the name of funding, that's how Jefferson put it, is swindling on a large scale. Now, Washington was a little bit more diplomatic in this speech. This letter was actually published as a letter and then reprinted as pamphlets around the country. Your liberty and your security rely on not being in a country that is broke, that is in debt to everyone based on the amount of money that it owes. He also says, and this is the big one that a lot of people in the constitutional world, libertarian world talk about, his foreign policy advice. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations, all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. And he goes on and he circles back to the talk about religion and morality. And he says, religion and morality enjoin this conduct. In other words, if you're a religious and moral person, you will, this is natural for you. Of course, the nations of the world, the founding generation wanted to be away from the European conflict. Everyone is trying to control each other. There's different factions, different kings and queens, and they're on team this faction versus that. The warring nature between the different states, the countries there in Europe. If you're a religious and moral person, you want to get away from that. And that's what Washington advised. Have peace and harmony with everyone. Cultivate it. Do everything you can to cultivate it. In the execution of such a plan, nothing is more essential than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations, long-standing hatred towards a particular country, and passionate attachment for others, loving other countries, should be excluded. Don't have a permanent hatred or love for anyone based on their country. That in place of them, just an amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated. Just try to be just and loving towards your neighbor. Seems pretty good and wholesome to me. The nation which indulges towards another a habitual hatred or habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. So the long-term love of the state of Israel, based on it being the state of Israel, no matter who's in charge, makes the U.S. a slave to that relationship. It could also be said the same of U.S. military bases in Germany and Okinawa and hundreds of other dozens of other locations around the world. There is a long-term commitment. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't support your friends, but then there's also a kind of an enmity, a hatred towards many other parts of the world on a long-standing basis. And I think that Washington was really onto something, saying that you're a slave to Team A again versus Team B. This is the same type of warning that comes out in regards to political factions, the way that you treat other nations around the world. And so that's incredibly important. And he goes on to talk about the wiles of foreign influence. Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens. The jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. And then he finishes up the foreign policy discussion. The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relationships to have with them as little political connection as possible. I just want to go to this one last section. We're not going to have a quote of the day today because the entire day is a quote of the day from George Washington and James Madison. But this article from Mike Meharry that we published this morning, we're going to send it out to our email newsletter. If you haven't subscribed, it's 10thamendmentcenter.com/register. The unheeded advice in George Washington's farewell address. I would say that all of his advice has been unheeded, all of it that we've talked about here. But this part goes to, and this really led up to the idea of siding with one faction or the other. Because what do people do when they side with one team or the other? They make excuses. So as when Obama was in office and we would talk about his foreign policy, we would often hear, well, he's not George Bush. He's not invading Iraq. He's just, it's not, the people who are at least somewhat honest would say, well, he's not what we'd like him to be, but he's better than so-and-so. And today, when we talk about the spending from the Trump administration or the gun control enforcement from the Trump administration, which is worse than the Obama administration so far, we hear, well, would you have supported Hillary? At least we don't have Hillary. They take an oath to the Constitution. They don't take an oath to the Constitution unless somebody else would have been worse. And Washington warned us about this. He called this usurpation. Don't turn a blind eye to usurpations just because your team is in charge. And that's what led to his discussion about faction. And Meharry writes this: when people remember or discuss the address, they often recall his warning against political parties, his admonition to avoid entangling alliances, and his insistence that religion and morality are indispensable supports to political prosperity. But we often read right over an even more poignant warning in Washington's address, a warning we failed to heed to our own detriment. As Washington put it, we must, quote, resist with care the spirit of innovation upon its principles, however specious the pretext. What is he saying? And this is the video that's probably publishing just about now. Washington warned against turning a blind eye to usurpations, no matter how small. If they violate the Constitution, you should stand up to it, because you create this environment where if you turn a blind eye because your team is in charge, then the other side's going to do the same thing. And they're going to expand power, and then your team gets in charge, and they're going to use that as a floor instead of a ceiling of power. And then you're going to turn a blind eye to that team, and power is going to continually grow and grow and grow. And the whole article that Mike did was incredible, but I really just want to cover this quote at the end. I guess this could be our quote of the day from Washington. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. Basically, he's saying, hey, if you don't like the restrictions on government, amend the Constitution. There's a process for it. But don't do this. Let there be no change by usurpation. For through this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good. It is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. If you turn a blind eye to the Constitution because your team is in charge or because you like the outcome today, eventually someone is going to use that additional power to expand power further or against you. And that is, and I'm not sure who wrote it, Washington or Madison or both, but it's both of them. They say this is the weapon by which free governments are destroyed. And here's how Meharry put it. We'll close out with this today. Sadly, Washington's advice has not been followed. Virtually every change to America's constitutional system, and it hasn't been changed, but in practice, every violation, I think it should say, has been by usurpation. The bastardized federal government has run up over $21 trillion in debt. It fights unconstitutional wars across the globe. It spies on virtually everybody and violates the right to keep and bear arms. It tells you what kind of insurance to buy and what kind of plants you can grow in your backyard. It reaches into every corner of your life, attacking your liberty at every turn. So, yeah, today, all quotes. Taco salad. Everyone hates Congress, but they all like their guy, or they're just willing to turn a blind eye. And this is exactly what Washington warned about. I want to thank you guys all for joining me here today. I've been learning a lot reading through this, studying the history. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you learned a little bit of something here as well. I'm very grateful for Justin, EHP Training, Taco Salad, Brian Hickman, Steve Smith, and everybody who spent time, Scouse Jack, everyone who spent time with me here live today. And of course, I'm very grateful for everyone who watches in the archives and shares this with everyone else. As a reminder, there is another video that we just published. I just recorded an edited video late last night, finished about 1 a.m., on just a short version talking about Washington's warning on ignoring the Constitution on usurpations. So please refresh our channel. Of course, smash the likes, hit subscribe. We'll give you some notifications. And we will be back next week, not next week, this Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time for our final episode of Good Morning Liberty for the week. 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Friday. I will see you then. Thank you so much for watching. And I hope you have a great day today.